Thank you. Okay, so we'll begin with a little review. To review in short, our first class spoke about the Shema, which we described as opposed to seeing from afar, opening to a vulnerability of relationship face to face, feeling the kiss, the closeness of God in our lives. The Shema being an invitation to not fear and not run away, but to open to relationship. We then, in our second class, jumped straight to Echad. We saw the bookends, and Echad, as we came into vulnerability, Echad invited us to really feel God within us, God filling all of the world, both the trees and the fish and the thoughts and the feelings. Echad as opposed to acher, as opposed to other, experiencing God within all. The third class, just yesterday, the third class, just last week, Hashem Elokeinu. We discussed the two names of God that peculiarly introduce the proclamation of God's oneness. We immediately encounter God's multiplicity. Two names. We discussed the first, Hashem, Yud He Vav He, as Chesed, the God of loving kindness, Elokeinu as the God of stricture. And we, at least I, realized that this conversation is a conversation that could be in itself 6 classes. And in experiencing Hashem both within loving kindness and within the tragedies, the pains, the punishment, we try to access the source of love within everything, the source of love within everything. And a piece of that process is the nullification and quieting of my own expectations and our own narratives that are deciding what's good and what's bad, are deciding what's pleasure and what's pain, what I want and what I don't want. Taking a step back from that in order to attempt, and again, this is, as the Gemara in Psachim and Rabbi Nachman described, this is the perspective of Olam Haba, of the world to come. It's not to say that we should feel bad about ourselves for not being there, or that we should even strive to already be there, but to be aware that there's a certain layer of reality in which really everything is. It is what it is. And in that way, it is a gift. And it is an expression of God. So with that, we'll come into an opening practice, get situated, come into our bodies. And we'll try to bring these 3 explorations that we've done so far together into a single practice. The practice of the Shema, with which we started our first class. The quieting could be understood in 2 ways. Potentially the quieting could be a, hey, cut out all the noise, quiet down, kids. Or alternatively, the quieting could be no longer seeing the kids as a disruption, but embracing them as simply part of the background, part of the orchestra that is life. So we're going to try to have that intention with the quieting of acceptance, of allowing. Brings us back to the first class. As the lips touch, we experience God's kiss, the vulnerability of Hashem in our lives, hearing that voice. And we're taken back to class 2, Echad, the out-breath, in which we experience and feel that God fills everything, breathing into everything, that God, just in the same way in which God breathed into me in order to give me life, so too God breathes into all life, giving its chiyut. Hmm. So just for a few minutes, I want to invite you to find a comfortable seat. Bring your legs to a comfortable position on the ground, sitting straight with your back. Imagine that there's a string pulling at the top of your head, connected to the sky, to Shema. A few breaths. Feel your body. Come with me into this moment. Quieting embrace. Feeling the kiss of Hashem. Hashem is echad, filling all life. Take your time. When you're ready, come back. Okay. So we take a step back. I always like to say, I during the summers run transformative outdoor adventures, and I always like to say that the first step is back, which we spoke about in our first class. So in order to step forward, we really need to take a step back and try to internalize a little bit and explain a little bit and organize what we spoke about last class. So in our last class, we had a few questions. First of all, we discussed the difference between the two names, Yud He Vav He and Elokeinu. What is the difference? What are the distinct aspects of these names? We also discussed this question of the Shema including both, as opposed to focusing on one. Why would the proclamation of God's oneness introduce us to two? We then asked the third question that we did not touch upon in class, which was that based on the Midrash and Rashi that spoke about the first chapter of Breshit as only introducing us to Elokeinu, the God of Din, of judgment, and the second half of, the second verse, the second perek, second chapter of Breshit, of Genesis, introducing us to Yud He Vav He, the God of compassion and love, and we thought, shouldn't it be opposite? Shouldn't you start with compassion and love and only thereafter introduce us to God's judgment, God's deed? So we'll begin with question 1. What are the aspects? And we're not going to look into the sources again, but we'll review it. We first said, as we just discussed, Yod Vavhe is the aspect of chesed, of loving kindness, while Elohim is the aspect of din. Din we discussed as judgment. I want to give a little bit more perspective as to this difference. That imagine the pouring of water. The Midrash spoke about the pouring of water in a glass. But this time, imagine that the water just pours and pours and pours. And the glass's walls decide not to stand up, and they just let go. They just let go and they release. They too want to partake in the pouring, and they just let go of any boundary. A world without boundary is not able to hold. They're not able to encounter this water in a glass, to drink this water, to experience it, to internalize it, because it's just an overwhelming waterfall. We may drink from a water fountain, but it's very difficult to drink from Niagara Falls. If we have no limitation, then there's no access point. So when we're talking about Elohim, the God of judgment, we're not only talking about that which brings tragedy to the world. We're talking about that which brings delineation and limitation into the world. And this aspect of delineation and limitation is the aspect of Elohim as multiplicity. We'll see here that Elohim is written in plural, right? Elohim is written in plural, as it is the aspect of God that's experienced both as multiplicity, because we experience God through all of the various limited aspects in this world, through the sun, through the earth, through a parent, through a friend, through emotions, through the tree. And it's the aspect of God in which we experience in multiplicity, that only in multiplicity are we able to meet the other. Only in being other are we able to have an interaction. So I want to be clear that the Elokeinu is not a bad thing. It's an extraordinarily necessary thing to have limitation, to have boundary, in order to be able to have a vessel for interaction. Now, we also saw in Masechet Pesachim that God is, Yud Vavhe refers to God's self, the essence of God, as opposed to Elohim, which is the name of God. So Yud Vav refers to Hashem, while Elohim refers to the name with which we interact with God. It's similar somewhat, and it's impossible to really make a comparison, but to Nadav, which is referring to my aspect, my essence, and teacher, which is referring to an aspect, a potential relation. So Elohim is, and we see this in the fact that Elohim is also used to refer to false gods, right? In the Torah, the second commandment, Lo yelecha Elohim acherim, don't have other gods. What? What do you mean other gods? Well, anything that you serve, that you call God, you call God. Nachon, it's not the true Yod He Vav He. It's not the essential one. But you serve it as, so it's gained the identity as. Elohim is a term of relation to something as God, as opposed to Yod He Vav He, which is the reference to God himself. Okay. We're going to, at the end of this review summary, have time for questions, so we'll get there. Feel free to write them in the chat, but you will also have time to address. Okay, this brings us to the ability to answer question 2, which is, why does the verse not simply say that is Hero Israel, Yud He Vav He is one. The true essence, central Hashem is one. There's no other. Now, Rabbi Nachman introduces us. We saw the tractate of Pesachim, in which we saw the discussion of the Aleinu prayer, the pasuk, the verse in Zechariah that says, "Bayom ha'u yeh Hashem echad u'shmo echad." On that day, God will be one and His name will be one. What do you mean? Says the Gemara. Is God not one now? Not so fast. Right now, our perspective perceives that there's a differentiation, there's a bifurcation. On the one hand, there's He who does good for us, who pours the water into us, who gives. And then there's He who says, stop. no more. Is he who gives us life, and is he who stops our lives, who gives us limitation, who gives us food, and then at sometimes says there's no food. There's also the aspect of Elohim we know is also the aspect that says, for example, Elohim is used, described in, and also Rabbi Nachman's writing, as, let's say you had a child who was crying, a baby's crying, baby's crying, and somebody hears and realizes the child is hungry, and they say, oh, baby child, you can have everything that I want. You can have everything you want. Please take my food. And he takes the steak, and he takes the broccoli, and he takes the caviar, and gives it to the child, and the child, baby keeps on crying. Can't figure out why you keep on crying. Really, love requires limitation. Understanding, what do you need? You don't need everything. You don't want everything. Everything is overwhelming. It's a waterfall. We need Elohim. It's not a bad thing, but now in our days, we perceive limitation often as a bad thing, while we perceive loving kindness and receiving, the giving one, as a good thing. But in the days to come, we will perceive all aspects of God as good. Now, I just want to point to two things that I think Rabbi Nachman very importantly adds to the Talmudic discussion, which is that Rabbi Nachman shares that this is not just a perspective that we can attain in the world to come. This is a perspective that's called Yediyah Shlema, full awareness, that we can tap into here in this world. The world to come is not just a futuristic projection, but it's something, it's an aspect of reality that's here right now that we can potentially tap into. He also importantly goes on to describe that the awareness of Hashem is awareness that Hashem is Echad, and Echad is Ahava. Being aware that everything is coming from love. Being aware that that parent is telling us, no, you can't have any candy because the parent cares about my health. In the same way, God doesn't give me, takes things away, but really it is for my best and for the best of our world. Again, I'm not claiming truly understanding this. These are words that I'm offering, not from a place of having achieved this perspective, and not from a place of explaining away the struggles and the tragedies that we or you have experienced. Okay, we had a challenge that Mitchell raised of the minimization of it's all good. It's just not satisfying. And I tended to respond, and I just want to offer a clarification and an addition. One is that we shouldn't think that the way towards all is good, the perspective that Rabbi Nachman and Masechet Pesachim are talking about, is one of, shh, go away, child, stop yelling. But one of, shh, you're also part of me. It's to embrace the bad as bad, the pain as pain, and the embarrassment as embarrassment. The most important step of finding that behind the love, pain, and embarrassment is love is first to accept it as part of it. If I'm running away, if I'm denying, if I'm pushing away, primarily my wife has taught me this. Primarily my wife. I learned a little bit from Rabbi Nachman, learned a little bit from Masechet Pesachim, but really my wife has taught me, if I'm angry, be there. Be honest with, don't try to run away. This has been a big challenge for me. In addition, that I want to add, which is something very interesting, is that it made me think about the chapters in Genesis in which on the days of creation, every single day, God concludes with, V'yar Elohim ki tov. God sees that it is good. But the second day it's absent. Why is it absent? Fascinatingly, Rashi quotes a Midrash Rabbah that explains that at the conclusion of the second day, the element that had been began to be created was not complete. Only once that day's creation is complete can it be described as good. That good, it's synonymous with whole in many ways. That is the root of the word shalom, by the way. The word for peace really means shalem, whole. It's not a piece of tolerance, let's say, of yeah, you can be you, I'll be me. You go in your corner, I'll go in my corner. It's a shlemut of each individual is full. So to here, we're not saying that everything is good and nothing is painful, but that the true good involves pain, involves challenges, involves death, involves tragedy. Okay, just give me 1 second. I'm very cold. I'm going to turn on the heat. I don't know if you can see, I'm like shivering. Okay. At the conclusion of last class, we also saw a beautiful piece from Binachan's primary student, and we're almost done with this piece of the evening, which Rav Nassan brings the piece of sleep. That sleep is the aspect of Kriyat Shema. A recitation of Shema only happens during the hours of sleep, and when it happens during the day, it only happens during the hours in which there are those who are still sleeping, because sleep is the aspect of nullification. Nullification, my understanding of nullification is that we're nullifying running after this world, meaning running after our expectations and our narrative for how this world should look. This world has to look this way. My job has to look this way. I need to look this way. My husband needs to look this way. My wife needs to look this way. My day-to-day, my wake-up hour needs to be whatever expectation we have set and definition that we have set for our lives as good or bad results in this inability to see that really all is one and all is love. Only at the moment of nullification, nullifying our expectations and our narrative, are we able to embrace what the world truly does look like and see the love within it. Now, question number 3 was, why does God begin with creating the world with judgment and only then compassion? And I think it's become obvious that only through having experienced the challenges, only through having experienced the separation, the being pushed away, am I able to also include that within. We're going to be touching upon that more today, so I don't want to go into it. So I'm going to stop here, and I reminded myself, thanks to my mom, who gave me a good, a lot of good advice as to how to separate our time. I'm getting myself a note of opening for questions right now. So that's what we'll do at this moment. First, check out the chat. Okay. Well, last class was powerful. Thank you so much. Discernment. Thank you for explanation about the negative compassion having no boundaries. Right. That compassion without boundaries is lacking as well. Blessing you, Dad. That's so sweet. Warms my heart. You're speaking from the heart and with wisdom. I'm grateful. That was amazing. Thank you so much. I feel like sometimes there's a perception of the teacher that the teacher feels good about themselves and confident. It's like, no, I'm always, after last class, I went to my mom, I was like, I didn't like that. I don't think it went that well. And I told my sister as well. Anyhow, the support, I really appreciate it. Your wife is included. You're so awesome. Okay, next time. Use the word include often when teaching. Just include whatever experience. Beautiful. Let this real embrace. Include. You're a part of it too. Now the Buddhists say, drop the story and experience what is. Said Susan. Drop the story and experience what is. I believe actually Lord Andrew is right now at a Buddhist retreat and has joined us from there. So much to share there. Okay, I want to open up to any questions.
I just have a thought.
Yeah.
About the last piece and connecting it with what you were talking about at the beginning, or talking about this idea of kind of a flood of water, and it's difficult to like it's too much. There's too much, so you're not getting anything out of it. And so I like the idea of the sleeping allows you, right? So you kind of like shut off one of your senses. Really, during sleep, you shut off more than one of your senses, but at least we're talking about your eyes being closed and not seeing. And so you're able to kind of shut down one sense so that you can kind of hone in on what really is important, or be able to like receive that kind of essence of what matters. And it also reminds me of what we talked about, I think, at the very first class about the Shema and listening, focusing on the sense of hearing. And just the idea that we have so many senses all going all the time in our daily lives, never mind technology and different pieces of technology, that there's kind of all this stimuli constantly, that it's hard to focus on what's important or what matters or what's real or what's at the core of what's going on. And kind of by shutting down or by focusing on just one sense at a time, you can zone in, hone in, zone in.
Beautiful. Beautiful. So not just a sense of focusing on this moment, which is a potentially, very theoretical idea, but to be able to draw that into a single sense of, okay, right now I'm just in listening and I'm quieting all else, really allows me to be in it, have something to hold on to without holding on to too much. I want to take the opportunity of no one else raising their hand to move forward into class 4. So class 4, at least leave half the class for it. We enter into the doubling of Shem Hashem. So we see the pasuk, a reminder of Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, Hashem our God, Yod-Heh-Vav our God, the Lord is one. Now, I just copied this from the last sheet, so ignore this piece. But why the repetition of Yod-Heh-Vav? That's also the why there. Okay, somebody will send it to the editor next time. Why the repetition? So from what we've said so far, all you need is hear, O Israel, Hashem, the God of compassion, Elokeinu, the aspect of God as judgment and constriction, is one. Why do we need the second Yud-Heh-Vav? Especially since we have Echad, meaning love, right? It's all God's love. Amazing. We don't need any second Yud-Heh-Vav. We know in the Torah that whenever there's a repetition, we have to ask. So my immediate response to this question was, well, there must be a dialectic. The second Yud-Heh-Vav is not identical to the first. It must be that in meeting Elokeinu, that through this process of Hashem meeting Elokeinu, Hashem creating the world, God creating the world and meeting the constriction, that God's essence, God has changed. That we, in our process of saying the Shema, potentially also are participants in facilitating a process for God in this world. And that's what I'd like our exploration to be. And the first step in exploring any such thing is to first be honest with all those who say, no, you are totally wrong. So many do disagree with me. And this is not, I think, a popular position, at least not in Torah Nigleh, in the revealed Torah. The Rambam says quite otherwise. It seems that since it is clear that Hashem is incorporeal, has no body, it clearly follows that none of the corporeal changes happen to him. There's no changing. Okay, right now he's just talking about there's no joining, no separation, none of the physical changes, no place, no measure. Okay, fine with that. But then he goes on to say, nor is he undergoing any change, as there is not to cause any change in him. Let's read the Hebrew. What could cause Hashem to change? Hashem doesn't change. Now, in that case, why do we have mitzvot? Why did he command us to do things? Doesn't he want something from us? Isn't there something that comes out of our doing the mitzvot, doing the commandments? Does it not cause change in God. Indeed, the Rambam says no, that serving God, we must bear in mind that all such religious acts, as reading the law, like learning Torah, praying, and the performance of the mitzvot, the performance of the law, serve exclusively as the means of causing us to occupy and fill our mind with the precepts of God and free it from worldly business. For whom are the mitzvot? For us. For us. To help us to let everything go, exactly what Ariella said. I'm focused on a mitzvah. I'm focused on a single act. I'm not focused on everything. I'm not distracted. I can actually focus on bringing God to mind and having God in occupying my thoughts, my emotions. For me, from my experience. We'll move right on to the Midrash Rabbah, because this is not Maimonides' medieval defenses or excuses to the Aristotelian thought that preceded him and prevailed at his time. I don't think, because the Midrash Rabbah says the same. The Midrash Rabbah writes, and I apologize, moving a little bit quickly through this half. It's the half that I want to propose otherwise. He says, if his way is perfect, how much more so is he himself? Then Rav asks, if God is perfect, then why the mitzvot, right? We're not the mitzvot given so that man must be refined by them? Sorry, I read a little bit wrong. But basically Rav asks, and it is a what do you call those questions that are not to be answered? In any case, you get it.
Rhetorical.
Yes. Well, rhetorical question. Thank you so much. We're not the mitzvot given so that man might be refined by them. For does the Holy Blessed One really care if an animal is slaughtered by front or by back of the neck? No. What does God care about shechita, about slaughtering an animal in the right way? Therefore, the mitzvot were only given to make humans better. Rav's opinion in the Midrash. Purpose of the mitzvot is just for making us better, refining human. It has no effect on God. God doesn't really care that much. Midrash Tanchuma, you should check this out afterwards. We won't go into it in class, but it's an awesome story about Turnus Rufus, a Roman leader or an emperor who came to Rabbi Akiva. And he asked Rabbi Akiva, why do you circumcise yourselves? Then Rabbi Akiva said to him, I anticipated your question. Bring me wheat here. He says, bring me wheat spikes, whatever, wheat and white bread. So I want both just the seeds and then bring me bread. Okay, wow, sorry. I don't know why this, okay, whatever. These are the words of what the spiked wheat is. Okay, he said to him, the former is the work of the Holy One, blessed be he, and the latter is the work of flesh and blood. Is not the latter more beautiful? He says, you want to eat the little grains of wheat? I don't imagine. You want to eat the white bread, and the white bread is a product of man. So clearly, man's hand can do that which God's hand can or chooses not. That God's acts are not necessarily as beautiful as man's act, and therefore it makes sense to circumcise. Turnus Rufus said to him, as much as he finds pleasure in circumcision, why does no one emerge from his mother's belly circumcised? Okay, he really wants, it's more beautiful to be circumcised. White bread is better. So why didn't God just make, grains of white bread and circumcise children that come straight out of the belly that way? What does Rabbi Akiva say? And why does the umbilical cord come out on him? Does not his mother cut his umbilical cord? So why does he not come out circumcised? It's not the only thing, Turnus Rufus. It's not just circumcision. There are other things that we add to existence. Because the Holy One, blessed be he, only gave Israel the commandments in order to purify them. Again, Rav Akiva's opinion is, God gave us the opportunity to improve life, to take life and raise it up a level. Yeah, he could have made the world perfect. no challenges, and no need for any participation. But for our sake, for our purification, God adds the necessary addition, the necessity of taking kernels of wheat and turning them into white bread, of taking male child and circumcising. Again, though, we know, though it's a fun story, that Rabbi Kiva's opinion is that the purpose of mitzvot are not for God's sake, but for our sake, to purify and to refine the human being. But I want to offer an alternate opinion, an alternate way of looking at it. What's in it for Hashem? Is there anything that God gets out of our behaviors, out of our mitzvot, and we'll see, out of our reading of the Shema? Now, there's something you may be familiar with. It's common for Sirat Omer, when we count the Omer, the 49 days between Passover and Shavuot, that we say prior, L'Shem Yichud Kudsha Brichu Shchinte. This is for the name of the unification of God, Kudsha Brichu, the essential Yod He Vav He, and Ushchinte, his indwelling presence in this world. Somehow, in doing this mitzvah, this commandment in particular, but as we'll see, it's relevant for all commandments and even beyond commandments, there's an intention that we can have that these behaviors will be for the sake of unification of God and his indwelling, implying that there's currently a separation that needs to be bridged. There's a gap that the human has the possibility of bridging, in which Hashem needs us, or at least wants us, to do this for him, and is something that Hashem does not do for himself. So the source of the Shem Yichud Kudsha Brichu, the source of saying these words is from what I found in Rabbi Eliyahu di Vidash, who was a 16th century Kabbalist from Tzfat, who writes that one must, prior to performing a unifying act, not only intend, but say in one's mouth and expel from one's lips that this act or this mitzvah that I am doing is for the sake of unifying the Shekhinah, the indwelling, with the Holy Blessed One. How so? Well, it's not just in doing mitzvah, Rav Vidash says, when one is walking to the synagogue for morning prayers, even on their way, he says, behold, I am going to unify the Shekhinah indwelling with the Holy Blessed One. I am going for this purpose. This is the purpose of my walking. This is the purpose of my process. I am here to unify God with his Shekhinah, with his indwelling. Rav Yitzchak Luria, who we're familiar with as the Ari HaKadosh, the probably most powerful and influential Kabbalistic thinker since its founding, since Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, who the attributed author of the Zohar. He writes, and we won't go into this now, if we have time at the end, we'll go into it in more depth. He writes that the intention that one should have when reciting the Shema in particular is this unification. That, of course, as Rav Vidash said, we want to have this intention always, but particularly this is the avodah, this is the work of the Shema, unifying Hashem, Hashem's essence, with Hashem's indwelling presence. So the intention, he writes, that one should have for the unification is the following. The first Yod He Vav He is referring to Father. Father refers to Chokhmah. We are going into concepts that are far beyond me. I'm just going to touch upon them. Father is the point of boundless consciousness. I say point because it's beyond space and time. Point is confusing, but it's consciousness itself, isness itself, beingness itself. Elohim, we see, is mother. Mother is the womb, the container for, offering space for, boundary, categorization. Also, once that consciousness turns into language, into thought. But check this out. He says the second Yod He Vav He is reflecting Da'at, embodied awareness. Now, potentially we could understand that this second Yud He Vav He is reflecting embodied awareness as an aspect of God and as an aspect of God in our lives. But I think we could also propose, and we'll continue as we go, that our process of bringing Yud He Vav He, God who is beyond the world, into our constricted worldly lives, right? Trying to connect and channel the infinite one into my particular moment, my particular experience, actually allows God to occupy an embodied awareness. Prior to creation, God is not embodied. As the Rambam said, God has no body. But what about after creation? Does God have a body? Well, certainly not. But I have a body, and God is in me. Embodied awareness is a product of God's creating this world and my choosing to let God in to my experience and my perspective in this world. The Kotzker Rebbe famously said, it's not written down, so I didn't bring it as a source. He famously asked his students, where is God? They said, Rebbe, of course, God is everywhere. Wrong. What do you mean? What do you mean? God, he told his students, is wherever you let him in. If we channel God into my life, if I channel God into my life through my words, if I bring Yud He Vav He into Elokeinu, into the world of bifurcation, differentiation, then I'm actually allowing God to transform into one who is also embodied in my life. Now, we won't continue into the rest of the Ariya Kadosh, and we'll just see a piece of what Rav Kook writes. Just these things, and really, I'll send but his writing is so beautiful and poetic. It's impossible to skip out, and you find so many sources. Like, well, there's way too many sources, but how can I let this go? So see little pieces. He writes, the thoughts, desires, and pursuits that flow forth from the spiritual spring of the divine light of life in their elevated eternal character. Okay, so that which flows forth from the divine space, which transcends all boundary and earthly order. These divinely sourced thoughts, desires, and pursuits live within us and raise our souls to the exalted realm of supernal freedom. And here, within us, they meet our rhythmic tendencies, fit for the practical arrangements and orderly positions, right? We're hearing Elohim, we're hearing boundary, we're hearing the aspect of mother, fit for the needs of embodied conscious living and their boundedness to the particularities of this world. These two distinct aspects of the source of all thought and the rhythmic bounds elements of human worldly living, these two distant aspects become unified together through our active behavior and the performance of mitzvot. Through our behavior, they come together. These two aspects through our behavior. When we're doing acts, I think what we've been hearing in these sources of mitzvot and in reading the Shema, we're not just trying to influence our own psyche. We are participating as existential process of bringing God into reality in a way that God was not prior. He continues, whose supreme hidden foundation is the revelation of God's will, which transcends all boundaries and world order, refining under its influence all lights of life, limited by all sorts of worlds. In coming down to reality, there's a tremendous healing. There's a tremendous refining that happens as God enters into this world and infuses this world, not only in having created it, but having been let in by our choice and our actions, our words. we come into Chavruta time. Before we enter the Chavruta time, we'll open up the chat and we'll open to questions. Okay. Well, can it be on all sides? The container. But how big is the container? I ask myself. I don't even know what that means. Like, I don't know. This question is blowing my mind. It's gonna be next week before class. I'll send out a summary of my thoughts on how big is the container. yeah, wild questions. Okay. Room for poetry. What does perfect mean? Right, when you're saying the Rambam speaks about perfection. And it's a great question because really perfection is defined by the perfect, right? There's no such thing as perfect in itself. Perfection is defined by the perfect. So everything will be on a spectrum between the most perfect and the least perfect. There is no perfect beyond that which is most perfect. So really perfect would be, I think, in being simply the fullness of self, so in that way, God is full and is fully every aspect of himself without any need for the world. The world adds nothing to the fullness of God's self. That would be the Rambam's, in my understanding, claim, or at least what that piece of the Rambam could teach us. I'm not an expert on the Rambam and have not read every word, so it would be improper for me to judge his perspective on life, but that might be what we read into that piece. Mam wrote, I don't think that Rambam and the Midrash Rabbah are saying that God doesn't care about the minutia of halacha, but that it is not for his sake, it is for ours. Right, beautiful. Yeah, there's clearly a benevolence and a love that's coming through that the Rambam would agree. Rambam has a shara, but Rambam has one of his books is called Ahava, one of the chapters of the Mishnah Torah. In any case, absolutely, but Mom, I think you make a beautiful point of just because it doesn't affect God and change God according to that perspective, it doesn't mean that God doesn't care deeply and that it's not a very deep expression of God's love. As a visual artist, Susan wrote, I see Dean cupped on both sides by Ahava, sort of wrapped, beautiful, sort of plays on God's name as Makom, Hine Makom Iti, the place of all. That don't think that the container is not contained. The container too is contained by the containless place of life. Now I get Mark's question. I read it out of context. I apologize. I'm also still sharing my screen, so I apologize for that. Okay, we're gonna jump. Rachel wrote, is nullifying the same as humbling? Going back to the aspect of nullification, beautiful. And just to answer Joanne's question before she has to go, yes, class 4 was emailed, but I changed it around significantly, so I'll email it again. So if you have to go, it is good to see you. To go back to Rachel's question, is nullifying the same as humbling? Yeah, I mean, first of all, I'll just share my current experience of like, am I supposed to know the answers to these questions? Just the thought of, I just want to like touch upon that experience that I'm having inside of, I don't know any of it, but just, exploring it together with you. So, that's a question to all of us. Happens to be that I've stolen the mic. But I think absolutely the Gemara teaches in a number of places. It's awesome that I forget the exact quote, but כל זמן בכל מקום שאתה מוצא את גדולתו, אתה מוצא את ענוותו. That any time you encounter God's greatness, you encounter is humility. And the Gemara gives a number of examples in which the verses speak about God's greatness and immediately after speak about God's humility, God's giving kavod to somebody else, giving honor to another, whatever it is. So I think this humility of recognizing it's not all about me is really an essential aspect of the nullification, that there could be a nullification. I really like what you're asking, Rachel, because I think it's pointing us to an important point, that my job is not just like, okay, nullify. No, you imagine us before going to bed, like, okay, 1, 2, 3, nullify. And it just doesn't work. But potentially relating to what everybody else shared about connecting to a particular sense through which is the aspect of not I'm giving up of everything, but I'm attaching to something. So maybe humbling is I'm not giving up everything, I'm attaching to caring about all. I'm attaching to a wider consciousness that doesn't put me at the center, but that loves all beings and that doesn't see myself as greater than all beings and only celebrates my achievements, but celebrates others' achievements as well. So that's beautiful. Okay. Wow, we're gonna do one more. I apologize. Noah wrote, I'm struggling with differentiation between God and reality and human awareness versus godly awareness. What is it that humans add to God's wholeness? What is it that humans add to God's wholeness? Yeah. Right? Because we don't really get it. What does it mean? On the one hand, we said that Hashem is echad, that Hashem is one, meaning that Hashem is not other, meaning that Hashem fills all of life. On the other hand, we're saying that the Kotzker said that where is God? Only where you let him in, and that there needs to be unification between God as creator and Elokeinu, the Shema, the indwelling. I don't understand. You're telling me two different things. Does God fill all life, or does God need me to let God in? I have no idea. That's got to be the Shem Shemayim, like one of those. That I think that's where Emunah comes in. One of the places where trust and faith of like, I don't get this, but somehow I think it's true that I'm not. Yeah, nothing in this world happens because of me. I didn't create myself. The fact that my arm is moving is not because of me. The fact that this plant is growing is not just because there's a law of physics called this, but somehow something is enlivening. Like, I don't know, there's an enliveningness, something's enlivening, everything happens not because I make it happen, intend it to happen, or anyone in this world or anything in this world intends it to happen. We are the most complex of beings in the world, yet we don't really intend anything to happen, and therefore it happens. We can intend to move my arm, but I've got thousands of things in my arms that are influencing whether or not it's going to be moved or not, even though I have an intention. Meaning that there's clearly there's clearly no true control that the human has, or that anybody or any other aspect has in life. On the other hand, we have a sense of self. We have a sense of being, that I'm not just God, I'm Nadav. I'm a consciousness who is conscious and intending in the world. I'm a perceiving being. And somehow I can let God in, or I can't let God in. But I just said that no decision I make can ever happen unless Hashem allows it to happen by making my arm move and making everything in the world. Yeah. Our mind can't grasp it. I don't know. That's just a really attempts to be with you in the wonder and in the confusion. I want us to have time for Chavrut, and I see that the messages are just keep on coming. It's awesome. I'm so excited because that does give me a good sense of self. Like, oh man, there's so much interest. So we're going to jump into Chavruta. I'm about to send the document in the chat. And during Chavruta, we're going to, just a moment. Okay. During Chavruta, we can go through the next few sources. There's really no limit, but don't feel pressured to move on, to move fast. It was very interesting. I'll just share prior to our jumping into Chavruta that coming into Shabbat, I had sent you the source sheets. I didn't feel that good about it. I felt like I had a thesis and I'm not really that convinced that I'm right, that God does go through process, because so many of the sources that I'm seeing are teaching otherwise. And that's how I came into Shabbat. And I realized as my wife and I were in a cab on the way to her grandparents, I haven't asked God. I've been looking at sources, but I never turned to God and asked, do we change you? Do we influence you? And as we're in the cab, I asked, in his turn, I asked, okay. And I get to shul, and I get to synagogue, and I like to have a book with me while sometimes there are gaps, and I open it up. So I saw a book that I recognized that was given as a gift to me when I spent Shabbat at the author's house. And I've opened it up like once. I said, what, let's check it out. And I opened it to this week's parasha. You won't believe what it says. It's really quite exciting. So I want to share with you. And and I share with you the wrong document. But I'll share with you quickly before we go into Chavruta. And you're gonna see your application. It said the following. Rav Yaakov Nagen, he lives in Israel, is currently alive. An ancient Kabbalistic homily offers an audacious interpretation for the verse. On the face of it, the verse of okay, I apologize. I'm not going to give it up. You'll check it out. You'll see what it says in Chavruta. I'm taking too much time. Okay, in any case, we're going to go jump to Chavruta, and then we'll come back in 10 minutes if we have time for short practice. Again, I will send over the chat the source sheet, and you'll see what I read in shul. It's really quite exciting.
I just have a Zoom question. If you send it in the chat and I open it up, I can't see it while I'm in a breakout room, can I? So I need to get it on my email or something, no?
I think you can while you open it up. It's not like
it should open as like a Word document or a PDF, right?
Right.
And so then
we don't lose it. We don't lose it when you come.
No.
Okay, we'll try it.
It's
Make sure you click it before you go to the breakout room.
Yeah. Michal, I'm going to ask you to make me the host again. Now put everybody up. Here is the source sheet. We'll jump in for 10 minutes, and hopefully we'll have time to check out other people's. Okay, breakout rooms.
Wait, but did we get the source sheet yet? Okay.
Yes, I just sent it, I believe.
You sent it to
No.
one person probably.
Oh, I sent it to one person. Okay, I'll send it to everybody. And right. Oh, I sent it to Steve. Hey, Steve. Okay. Okay. Great. I hope that everyone had a great time.
There's plenty to talk about without having additional sources.
This was a social experiment, and you all passed.
I get kicked out. Oh no.
I apologize. Okay, we have a little time, and hopefully we'll also, for those who are able to stay on, hopefully we will also have time for a practice at the end. I just want to go through a few of the sources, really just to touch upon them, and then give it a chance for you guys to discuss and to hear one another's voices, as I've been speaking quite a lot. Okay, so the source that I was going to show you that I saw at that moment in Shul was this. It's based on our parasha from this past week, from this past Shabbat, in which God tells us to build a sanctuary for him to dwell in it. And he says, on the face of it, the verse seems to call for gifts. We saw this in a previous pasuk, in a previous verse, for the construction of the tabernacle. So why does it say take me rather than bring me? It doesn't say bring me gifts. It's vaikhuli. It says take me. Bahir, which is a ancient text attributed to the 1st century that has no author, or it's anonymous, but it's attributed to Nechunya ben Akana, explains that God is not asking men to bring, but rather take. He says, take me, so that he is the offering, to raise him up, to raise God up. Man has the capacity to influence God. Can you imagine coming into a show and it's like, what? This is exactly the question. Man has the capacity to influence God. He explains, great. So he quotes the Behir, but he says that Teruma, which means typically translated as a gift, but it comes from the root leharim, to raise up, that this Teruma it means lift me with your prayers. And who? Those who are willing of heart, kos and adiv libo, everyone who is willing of heart should raise him with their prayers. That your prayers, your actions, our behaviors actually raise God up, bringing Hashem Elokeinu through this process, through coming into our world, a world of constriction, a world of challenges, a world of us having to turn to God and to try to bring God into the dark places, that we actually end up raising God up, bringing him to higher places, bringing to more embodied places, as we've seen a few explanations before. We won't. There's a whole piece about the idea of crowning God and giving God kingship over us, which is an idea that's spoken about in the Midrash of there's no melech without an am. There's no king without a people. Kingship, again, we discussed last time, malchut is the aspect of embodiment, actuality, manifestation, that God cannot be manifest without us manifesting God. Not saying that God doesn't come down into the world, and this touches upon no question that God doesn't come down upon the world, but the essence, the aspect, Tselem Elokeinu, who we are, which is Tselem Elokeinu, we're made in the image of God, can't come into the world unless we choose to act as in the image of God. Our time is short, as we said, so I'm going to open it up to hearing your thoughts, your comments, questions with one another. Yeah, Daniel, please.
So the high point for me in the class today came much earlier in the class, when you had in the notes Yud He Vav He as being essence, and then you had in bold self. And I know that the Hebrew word for essence and self is the Hebrew word etzem. Etzem, which also means bones. And it's this great description of this embodied essence, this essential self, this presence that is within us. And I find the most radical, I don't know if you agree with me or not, but I find the most radical teaching in Judaism, and with these names of the divine, as orienting us to the fractal of Yud He Vav He that is our essence, that is the chiyut, the life energy in us. It's already embodied. It's not like we have to take it from somewhere there and bring it here. It's already here. It's about how do we receive this gift that we take with us because it's already inside of us. And maybe, that unification of Yud-Heh Vav-Heh and Shekhinah. The Shekhinah is that indwelling fractal of presence within us, that as human beings, we have this opportunity to actually experience our own self, our own true self, our own essence as Yud-Heh Vav-Heh. It's that not that any of us can do this for more than like a half a second a day, but we can get glimpses. At least I sometimes feel a little bit that presence, and I'm not sure it has to be 100%. It's more of that taste of the divine. So anyway, I thought that was important language, that what could be more personal than the word self? What could be more whole than a capital S self that is that Tselem Elohim that we are born with? It's our innate essence. So anyway, that simple language just really comes home for me.
Beautiful. Yeah, thank you so much for saying it. It just reminds me for a second of the psukim that teach that the simple reading of the psukim are talking about the Torah, but it's also, I think, talking about God is Lo me'ever layam. It's not across the sea, and it's not on the sun. It's not far away. It's right in here. Mama's right in here. There's
Right in the mouth. Yeah.
This point of contact. Yeah, Tiferet.
Thank you. I hope that this practical example actually is all right to share in the group. So Daniel's bringing up really the if you will, like the theology, the theory, and all week long. So I'm in Canada, and I don't know what type of news you guys get, but actually our capital is being occupied, our nation's capital, and by truckers, and hospitals are threatened, and there's a lot going on here. It's like we're having our January 6th, that was their aim, their stated aim.
Wow.
And so these trucks, these convoys of trucks are going through like all our major cities, and I live in Vancouver, and from where I'm sitting right now, I watch the trucks go by. They're like a building away from me on one side and a street and a half away on the other. So I'm kind of on two sides of this, and people laying in the streets to stop these trucks. And it was intense. And so what do I do? What do I do? Do I participate in the counter protests that were really very clever and effective, knowing that if I'm there, I'm going to be really, really angry, really angry? So how do we, which is the right decision? And where is the limit? Where is the limit of chesed? And how do we discern what that limit is? So I'm so grateful for these classes, because these are the questions we should be asking ourselves. And we're going to be having to, we are living them actually, but there are going to be times when we are going to know acutely that we're living them.
Well, beautiful, Tiferet.
Exactly what did I do?
Yeah, it's and trying to bring the theoretical just to watch the last 3 minutes, which was Daniel speaking of beautiful theology, and Tiferet trying to take that theology and bring it into a decision in her life. Like, oh, that was the class. Yeah, that's the class right now. Experienced, reflected in a reality of, okay, how do I bring this into my life right now? What does it mean for me right now to be walking in God's ways, to be bringing the Yod Kei Vav Kei into the Elokeinu, into the Shekhinah, to bring a union between those two? And it's not always clear, right? It doesn't always mean chesed. It could mean vura. It could mean boundary. It could mean the Gemara in Maseret Shabbat says that on the one hand, one should never be angry. On the other hand, it is important at times to express anger, to express boundary, to express limit, to express emotion, to feel that might be more problematic as expressed there. But in any case, it's beautiful questions and a really beautiful process that you just took us through. Thank you. Noah. Or should I call on Zev? Zev, I don't think, no, we can't hear you. Where is it?
Yeah. What if I
Oh, now we can, now we can.
Okay, great. So I'm on board with the God changing aspect, and your side over. My question is, I'm wondering if you can go back and explain a little bit more about where you see that in the Shema. And like, I understand it says Yod Hey Vav Hey twice, but why does that mean change as opposed to just emphasis? You know what I mean?
Nadav, before you answer, you don't have to call on me because I was also feeling like I missed the Yod Hey Vav Hey twice lesson. Maybe that was a lesson and I missed that, but maybe you could just explain a little better.
Yeah, I mean, I think what we're trying to say is that the Yod Hey Vav Hey prior to Yod Hey Vav Hey as God's self, God's essence, prior to Elokeinu, the creation of a multiplicitous world, world in which there is boundary and definition, separation, is that Yod Hey Vav Hey prior is not the same as Yod Hey Vav Hey after. And after, we're not talking about in 1,000 years. We're talking about now that God has created this world and through our behaviors becomes invited into participation within my consciousness. And I can intend in my behaviors to bring union to God as prior to existence, prior to creation, and the manifest reality around me. I've now brought God, I've raised God up in a sense to a higher level, that now God is inclusive of this world, as I forget who proposed the word inclusion. And maybe it was Rachel, but to include, we've now actually partaken in a process in partnership with God, in which we've raised one another up, and in which obviously we've been raised up, as we saw from Maimonides and from the Midrash Tanhuma, that we are refined by this process, but also God is saying thank you to us. And with that, I think is a good time for the final, our ending, for those who are able to stay, for our concluding practice. Because what I first want to do in our concluding practice is to invite each of you, will take really just a few quick minutes to write something in the chat, a way in which you feel this past weekend, Shabbat, you raised God up in the world. You helped bring God into this world. You let God in. A way in which you feel that you brought union between the creator and the created. It doesn't need to be with somebody else. It doesn't need to be having helped somebody across the street. But one way in which you feel that you brought union. Thought it'd be fun for the chat just so we can see one another's, but if anybody's not comfortable, then no pressure at all. And once we've done that, we'll end with a short meditation of gratitude. Okay, if anybody still wants to write, you're invited, and conclude with meditation. I want to invite you to find a comfortable seat. If you're feeling antsy about the time, this meditation will be over at 7:30, so just 2 minutes. Find a comfortable seat and your legs flat to the ground, your feet flat to the ground. Imagine that your head is being pulled up to the sky. On the in-breath, I want to invite you to say thank you to God for giving you breath. And the out-breath, I want you to imagine that God is saying thank you to you for the breath that you bring into the world, the unique breath that you share with the world around you. Saying thank you. Hearing thank you. Giving thanks. Receiving thanks. It's now 7:30 for those who have to go. I want to encourage everyone who feels inspired to continue with the practice. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Ralph. See you next week.
See you next week.